My name is Clara. I am 58 years old, a retired school teacher, and a mother who once believed that nothing in this world could shake the foundation of my family. But tonight, as I sit here telling you this, I know that belief was nothing more than a fragile illusion, because it was my own son and his wife who orchestrated a plan to erase me and my husband from existence. And it all began on what was supposed to be a joyous celebration. Our 35th wedding anniversary. I need you to understand what happened, because once you do, you'll never look at your own family gatherings the same way again. Picture this, a beautiful lakeside villa in northern Michigan, candles flickering on the dining table, laughter echoing against the water, and the promise of a surprise party planned by the very people I loved the most. It should have been a dream. Instead, it became the setting for the most terrifying realization of my life. That evening, after dinner, everyone insisted I drink a little too much champagne. They pushed for it with unusual eagerness, refilling my glass before I could finish the last sip. I played along, but inside, something didn't feel right. Maybe it was the way my son Ethan kept glancing at his wife Vanessa, as if checking to see whether I had swallowed enough. Maybe it was the faint, nervous smile on my husband Samuel's face, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. So, instead of letting the alcohol dull my senses, I began to pretend. I let my head droop slightly. I let my words slur just enough, and I allowed them to think I was drifting into a drunken haze. That's when I heard it. The conversation that will haunt me for the rest of my days. I had excused myself and sat quietly in the living room, pretending to nap, when Ethan's voice carried over from the kitchen. He wasn't whispering, he was speaking in the confident, careless tone of someone who thinks no one else is listening. By tomorrow, he said, everything will be official. The paperwork will show that the house, the land, even the retirement funds, they all belong to us. Vanessa laughed softly, a sound that once warmed my heart, but now chilled me to the bone. And the best part, she added, is that no one will question it. It'll look like we were simply taking care of them. They'll thank us for it if anyone asks. Then Ethan said something that froze my blood. Once they're gone, no one can dispute it. We'll have what we need to finally be free. Gone. That single word twisted in my stomach like a knife. Gone didn't mean moved away. Gone didn't mean retired. Gone meant erased. Out of the picture. Forever. I kept my eyes shut, my breathing steady, praying they wouldn't notice that I was fully aware. My mind raced. Was my husband a part of this? He had been acting strange for weeks, brushing off my questions whenever I asked about our finances. Did he know? Was he complicit, or was he just another pawn in Ethan and Vanessa's game? My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might give me away, but then I heard Vanessa's voice again, lower this time, but sharp, like the snap of a twig. We can't afford to wait. The debts are piling up. Ethan, if we don't secure everything soon, we'll lose it all. This is the only way. By the time anyone realizes, we'll be untouchable. Untouchable. That word echoed in my ears. My son and his wife weren't just thinking about inheriting, they were planning something far darker, something that required Samuel and me to disappear from the picture altogether. I wanted to rise up then and there, to confront them, to scream that I had heard everything, but something inside me, some instinct, told me to stay quiet. If I revealed myself too soon, I'd be playing right into their hands. I needed to survive the night. I needed to know just how far they were willing to go. As I sat there, forcing myself to remain still, flashes of memory rushed through me. Ethan as a boy, bringing me handmade cards on Mother's Day. Vanessa hugging me in the kitchen the first time she called me Mom. Family cookouts, birthdays, Christmas mornings filled with laughter. Had it all been a lie, or had something changed in them? Something I had been too blind or too hopeful to see. The laughter from the kitchen faded, replaced by silence. Then footsteps approached. I felt Vanessa's hand on my shoulder, gentle, almost tender. "Poor thing," she whispered, thinking I couldn't hear. She has no idea by next week everything will be ours. Her words were the confirmation I didn't want but desperately needed. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. My own son and his wife were conspiring to erase us, to steal the life Samuel and I had spent decades building. And that's when another voice cut through the night. One I didn't expect. My husband, Samuel. His tone was firm, controlled, but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Enough, he said quietly. Not tonight. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Vanessa didn't argue. She just chuckled again and walked away, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Ethan muttered something under his breath, and the two of them disappeared down the hall. But Samuel's words lingered in my ears. What did he mean by not tonight? Did that mean he knew? Did that mean he had been part of their planning all along as I sat there, eyes closed, heart racing? I realized I was at the edge of a truth too terrible to face. The celebration was nothing but a mask. And behind that mask was a plot to destroy me. A plot written not by strangers, but by my own flesh and blood. That night, at the lakeside villa, I learned the most painful lesson of my life. Sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from the outside world. Sometimes it comes from within the walls of your own home, from the very people you have loved and trusted the most. And yet, as horrifying as those words were, I also knew something else. If they believed I was weak, if they believed I was blind, then I had one advantage: they didn't count on the ability to watch, to listen, and to wait for the right moment to fight back. But to do that, I would need to uncover everything, and I would need to face the possibility that my husband, the man I had built my life with, might not be as innocent as I wanted to believe, because if he was involved, then the betrayal went even deeper than I ever imagined. And that was a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. When I think back on the life Samuel and I built together, it still feels surreal that it could all be so fragile. We met in the late 70s at a church picnic in Ohio. He was an engineering student who loved jazz and classic cars, and I was a young teacher who spent every extra dollar on books for my classroom. He made me laugh when I was too serious, and I steadied him when his dreams carried him too far. For 35 years, we believed we were proof that hard work, faith, and love could protect us from the storms of life. Our home reflected that belief, a modest 2-story house on a quiet street in a small Ohio town, where the neighbors still waved when you drove by and children played in front yards until dusk. We planted roses along the walkway, painted the shutters a cheerful blue, and filled the kitchen with the smell of cornbread, collard greens, and Sunday roasts. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. Every paycheck went into building a future we thought we would pass down to our sons. We raised 2 boys. Marcus was the firstborn, a natural leader with a sharp wit and a big heart. He studied late into the night, ran track, and dreamed of becoming a lawyer. He was the one neighbors trusted to mow their lawns or tutor their kids. He had a laugh that filled a room. And then there was Ethan, 5 years younger, quieter, more reserved. He was artistic, more interested in sketchbooks and music than in sports or debate teams. I loved them both fiercely, though the truth is, I sometimes wondered if Ethan felt overshadowed by Marcus's glow. When Marcus died in a car accident at 22, it ripped a hole straight through my soul. I can still remember the knock on the door, the police officer's solemn expression, the way Samuel sank into the porch chair as though his body had lost all strength. That day, our family shattered. Ethan was just 17 then, standing in the corner of the living room, his face pale and unreadable. He didn't cry like I expected. Instead, he simply asked, "So it's just me now?" I hugged him, believing it was grief speaking. But now, years later, those words ring differently in my ears. We tried to rebuild after Marcus's death. Samuel buried himself in work, and I returned to teaching, finding comfort in the chatter of children and the routine of lesson plans. Ethan drifted through those years, sometimes moody, sometimes strangely attentive. He went to community college for a while, then started a small contracting business. When he met Vanessa, I thought she was an angel sent to heal him. She was bright, charming, always calling me Mom, with such warmth that I believed she truly saw me as family. They married in a small ceremony by the lake, with just a few friends and relatives. I remember crying tears of joy, thinking my boy had finally found his place in the world. For a while, it looked like everything was back on track. Ethan and Vanessa had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, who brought laughter back into our lives. They visited often, filling the house with the noise of toys and cartoons, and I cherished every moment. Samuel would take the kids out to the yard to teach them how to build birdhouses. While Vanessa helped me in the kitchen, I told myself this was what life was supposed to be, that Marcus would have wanted us to move forward, but beneath that surface of normalcy, there were cracks. Sometimes Ethan would make comments that unsettled me about how Marcus had always been the favorite, or how unfair it was that Marcus had been set to inherit more of the family property because he was the oldest. At the time, I brushed it off as old sibling rivalry that grief had left unresolved. Now, I wonder if those words were the seeds of something darker, something that had been growing quietly for years. Samuel and I tried to stay focused on the positive. We worked hard, saved carefully, and eventually paid off the house. Between his pension and my retirement funds, we managed to set aside nearly everything we dreamed of. We even bought a small piece of land outside of town that Marcus had once loved to hike on, believing we would one day pass it to our grandchildren. Every plan we made was for them, for Ethan, for Vanessa, for the little ones. Family was supposed to be our legacy. Maybe that's why it hurts so much now, because every memory that once brought me peace now feels poisoned. Every laugh around our dining table, every holiday toast, every birthday candle blown out, it all feels tainted by what I know now, by the knowledge that Ethan and Vanessa saw us not as loved ones, but as obstacles standing between them and a pile of money, and Samuel. I look back now and see the moments I missed, the times he looked troubled when Ethan asked about our finances, the nights he brushed off my questions with a distracted, "Don't worry about it," the stack of papers on his desk that he always locked away before dinner. Was he protecting me from worry, or was he keeping secrets? Ashamed of the part he had played, I tell you all this because I want you to understand how carefully the illusion was built. We weren't strangers to hardship. We weren't naive about the world, but we trusted our son. We trusted his wife. We trusted the idea of family as something sacred and unbreakable, and that trust blinded us. Now, when I remember the way Ethan smiled across the table at that anniversary dinner, or the way Vanessa leaned over to refill my glass, I can't help but shudder, because behind those smiles was something cold, something calculated. I didn't know it then. But that night at the lakeside villa was not the beginning of their scheme. It was only the moment when their years of quiet planning finally revealed themselves to me, and if I had known what was truly hiding behind those familiar faces, perhaps I would have seen the signs sooner. Perhaps Marcus's death would not haunt me the way it does now, but as I sat in that villa, pretending to be drunk, listening to the laughter of my own son and daughter-in-law as they plotted my disappearance, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about money. This was about control, resentment, and secrets buried so deep that unearthing them would shake everything I thought I knew about my family. And soon, those secrets would begin to surface. Looking back, the signs were always there, like faint cracks in a window that you don't notice until the whole pane is about to shatter. At first, I thought it was just me being paranoid. The natural worry of a mother who had already lost one child and couldn't bear the thought of losing another. But the more I paid attention, the more those little details started to align into a pattern I could no longer ignore. Ethan and Vanessa began visiting us more often, which should have been a joy. Grandparents dream of extra time with their grandchildren, but these visits were different. They weren't about family meals or playing board games with the kids. They were filled with conversations that circled back, over and over, to our finances. Mom, Dad. Have you thought about updating your will? Ethan asked one Sunday afternoon, his tone so casual it sent a shiver through me. Vanessa and I were just talking about how important it is to make sure everything is set in stone. You wouldn't want the kids to go through a messy process if something unexpected happened. Vanessa would nod beside him, always with that soft, reassuring smile that had once put me at ease. We just want to make sure you're both taken care of. You know, with Samuel's health scares last year, and with you slowing down. Clara. It would be smart to have everything managed properly. I remember looking at her hands as she spoke, perfectly manicured fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug, and thinking how strange it was that someone so young was so concerned about the legal structure of our estate. At night, I began to notice other oddities. Samuel would come home from the bank or the lawyer's office with documents tucked under his arm, quickly sliding them into the desk drawer before dinner. When I asked, he brushed it off with a weary smile. Just routine things. Clara, nothing you need to worry about. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't ignore the shadow that crossed his face whenever Ethan's name came up. Then there were the smaller, stranger moments. The scent of perfume on Samuel's shirt one evening, light but unfamiliar, not mine. He claimed it came from a colleague's hug at a retirement party, but the explanation felt too neat, too rehearsed. I told myself not to overthink it, yet a seed of doubt had been planted, not about his fidelity necessarily, but about what he wasn't telling me. One evening, as I sorted through the mail, a letter from our insurance company caught my eye. It was addressed to me, congratulating me on updating the beneficiary designation on my life insurance policy. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't updated anything. I hadn't even been in contact with the insurance company for months. When I called their office the next morning, the agent politely confirmed that the beneficiary had been changed from Samuel to Ethan. The paperwork had come through with what appeared to be my signature. I knew immediately that something was wrong. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. My signature was distinctive. A school teacher's cursive honed over decades of grading papers and writing notes to parents. If it wasn't mine, then someone had forged it. But who? That night, I confronted Samuel, holding the letter out to him at the dinner table. He stared at it for a long moment before setting it down, rubbing his temples as if his head suddenly hurt. Clara, please, he said softly. Don't work yourself up. I'll look into it. But there was no outrage in his voice, no surprise, only resignation. The unease only grew stronger the following week when I walked into the living room and found Vanessa sitting at my desk, rifling through our filing cabinet. She jumped up quickly, flashing that same sweet smile, and said she had been looking for a pen, but I had seen the folder in her lap, the one labeled Property Deeds. She set it down a little too quickly. Her cheeks flushed as if she had been caught doing something she shouldn't. After that, I started noticing their whispers. Ethan would step outside to take phone calls, his voice low, but sometimes I caught snippets. "Oh, we'll finalize it soon. They won't suspect. Just sign when I tell you." When I asked what the calls were about, he claimed they were clients for his contracting business, but I knew the tone of my son's voice. That wasn't business. That was scheming. The worst moment came one Friday evening when I overheard Ethan speaking to Samuel in the garage. I'd gone out to fetch a basket of laundry, and their voices drifted through the slightly open door. "Dad, it's the only way," Ethan was saying. "We're drowning here. If you don't help me, we'll lose everything. You know Mom won't understand. She never does. But if we handle this the right way, no one will question it. It'll just look like you were preparing for the future." I froze in the hallway, my heart slamming against my ribs. Samuel's reply was muffled, but I caught the words I already signed. "But this has to be the last time." My breath caught. Signed what helped him. How and why did my husband's voice sound so defeated? So unlike the man I had leaned on for nearly 4 decades, I crept back upstairs, my legs trembling beneath me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to Samuel's steady breathing beside me, wondering what secrets he was keeping, what role he had already played in whatever plan Ethan and Vanessa were weaving. It was becoming clearer each day that I was standing on the edge of a dark truth, one that threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. I wanted to believe that Samuel was innocent, that Ethan was simply struggling with money and making foolish choices, that Vanessa was only trying to support him. But the evidence was stacking up, piece by piece, and my instincts screamed that something much more sinister was happening. Still, I told myself, suspicion is not proof. A mother's heart can misinterpret things when fear clouds her vision. Maybe I was imagining connections where none existed. Maybe my grief over Marcus had left me hypersensitive, seeing shadows in every corner. I wanted so badly to be wrong, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. Something was very, very wrong. And soon, I would stumble on the first undeniable proof that my fears were not only justified, but long overdue. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that should have been forgettable. I had been cleaning the guest room after Ethan and Vanessa's most recent visit. They always left behind traces of themselves, half-empty coffee mugs, the faint smell of Vanessa's perfume clinging to the curtains, toys scattered across the carpet from the children. As I tucked the blankets back into place, I noticed something that didn't belong. A leather folder. Slim and dark brown, wedged between the mattress and the headboard. At first I thought it was Samuel's, but when I pulled it out and flipped it open, my heart nearly stopped. Inside was a set of legal documents, crisp and freshly stamped, bearing my name, deed transfers, power of attorney forms, and at the bottom of each page, a signature that looked like mine but wasn't mine. The handwriting was close, eerily close. But I knew the curve of my own C in Clara. I knew the way my hand dipped slightly when I wrote the... Whoever had done this had studied me carefully, practiced until they could mimic me. My stomach twisted as I realized what I was holding. These weren't just papers. They were proof that someone likely my own son and his wife had crossed a line I never thought possible. I slipped the folder under my sweater and carried it to the kitchen. My hands shook as I laid each page on the counter, scanning them one by one. The house was listed, valued at nearly $300,000, with Ethan's name marked as the new primary owner. Our retirement savings account, too, had been included in the paperwork, as if I had willingly transferred control. It was all there, in black and white, as if I had signed away my entire life without knowing it. I wanted to scream, to call Ethan immediately, to demand an explanation, but some instinct told me not to instead. I gathered the documents and locked them inside my hope chest in the bedroom, beneath quilts my grandmother had sewn decades ago. I told myself I would decide later what to do, once I had calmed down. That evening, when Samuel came home, I searched his face for answers. He sat down at the kitchen table, loosening his tie, and I placed one of the forged pages in front of him without a word. His eyes flicked down to it, then back up at me, and in that brief moment of silence, I got my answer. There was no shock, no outrage, just weariness. Clara. He sighed, pushing the paper away. I told him it was too soon. I told him this wasn't the way. My heart dropped. So you knew I whispered. You knew about this. He rubbed his temples, avoiding my eyes. He's desperate. The business is failing. He promised he would pay it all back. I thought if I signed a few things, just temporarily, we could keep him afloat until he found his footing again. His words felt like ice water poured over me. Samuel, this isn't a loan. This is theft. This is fraud. My voice shook with anger and disbelief. He finally met my gaze, and what I saw there was not malice, but shame. I was trying to protect him, he said softly, after Marcus. I couldn't lose Ethan, too. His confession broke something inside me. I realized then that Samuel had been carrying guilt all these years. Guilt for Marcus's death, Guilt for favoring one son over the other. Guilt that had driven him to enable Ethan even as he crossed unforgivable lines. For days after. I moved through the house in a fog. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every corner of the home we had built together seemed haunted by betrayal. The forged documents weighed on me like a stone, proof that my world was unraveling. I began checking Samuel's desk drawers when he was out, flipping through envelopes and files, searching for more, and I found it. A letter from a bank congratulating Ethan on being approved for a large loan, secured by property that technically still belonged to Samuel and me. My name appeared again as guarantor, signed in that same eerie imitation of my handwriting. The puzzle pieces began to lock together. Ethan wasn't just drowning in debt. He was clawing at our future to save himself, dragging Samuel into complicity along the way. And Vanessa Sweet. Smiling Vanessa was not just a supportive wife, she was a strategist. I found a note in her handwriting tucked inside the bank envelope. Make sure your mother doesn't suspect anything until after the anniversary. My hands shook as I read it. So this was their timeline. The anniversary party wasn't just a celebration. It was part of a plan. I tried to act normal in the days that followed, smiling when they came to visit, serving dinner as if nothing was wrong, but inside, I was unraveling. Every laugh from Vanessa sounded like a lie. Every affectionate hug from Ethan felt like a knife, twisting deeper into my back. They believed I was still in the dark, and that gave me one small advantage. If I could keep pretending, if I could keep my face calm while my mind raced, then maybe I could uncover everything before it was too late. The first true test came when Vanessa caught me alone in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, her voice sweet but sharp. You know, Clara, this house must feel too big for just the two of you now. Don't you ever think about downsizing, moving somewhere smaller, easier to manage? I forced a smile, stirring the pot of stew on the stove. Oh, we're comfortable here, I said lightly. Plenty of memories in these walls. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. With something hard and calculating, memories don't pay property taxes, she murmured before walking away. That moment confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't just Ethan's scheme. Vanessa was fully invested, pushing just as hard, if not harder. At night, when Samuel and I lay side by side in silence, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how much deeper the deception went. If they were willing to forge my signature, what else were they capable of? How far would they go to secure what they thought belonged to them? Each day felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon, one misstep away from plunging into disaster. And yet, even as fear gnawed at me, another emotion began to take root, resolve. Because now I had proof, tangible evidence that my suspicions were real. And though it terrified me, it also gave me power. For the first time, I understood that I wasn't just a helpless mother caught in her son's web of lies. I was a witness. And if I played my part carefully, I could become something even more dangerous. I could become the one who turned their scheme against them. What I didn't know then was that the documents I had found were just the beginning. The full scope of Ethan and Vanessa's betrayal was far larger, far darker, and far more personal than I could ever have imagined. The days that followed felt like a performance in a play I had never auditioned for. Each morning, I woke up and slipped on the mask of a dutiful mother and wife, smiling when Ethan dropped by, laughing at Vanessa's little jokes, pretending I didn't notice the way their eyes flickered with impatience when the subject of money didn't come up fast enough. But beneath that mask, my mind worked furiously, cataloging every detail, searching for cracks in their facade. I knew I couldn't rely solely on instinct anymore. I needed more proof, something undeniable. Something that could not be brushed aside by Samuel's tired excuses or Ethan's smooth reassurances. One afternoon, when Samuel left for a doctor's appointment and I was certain Ethan and Vanessa wouldn't be visiting, I went into the garage where Samuel kept his locked filing cabinet over the years. I had never questioned his need for a private space, but now the lock felt less like privacy and more like a barricade. It took me 20 minutes to pick it with an old hairpin, my hands sweating, my breath shaky. But when it finally clicked open, I knew I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Inside were folders stacked neatly, labeled in Samuel's precise handwriting. At first, it looked harmless utility bills, tax returns, insurance statements, but tucked at the back, nearly hidden, was a manila envelope with Ethan's name scrawled across the front. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were copies of bank statements, loan documents, and credit card bills. The numbers leapt off the page, each one more shocking than the last. Ethan owed more than $100,000. Multiple banks, suppliers, and even what looked like private lenders with names that made my skin crawl. The interest rates were predatory, the balances overwhelming. It was a house of cards on the verge of collapse. Scrawled in Samuel's handwriting at the bottom of one page were the words, "Temporary Ethan promised to repay." I felt my stomach churn. My husband had known for years, quietly watching Ethan sink deeper into debt while helping to prop up the lie that everything was fine. Worse, he had allowed our assets to become tangled in that mess, risking everything we had built for a son who clearly had no intention of changing. That night, I confronted Samuel again, this time holding the evidence in my hands. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" I asked, my voice trembling with fury. He didn't answer right away. He sat at the table with his head in his hands, shoulders slumped like a man who had already lost the fight. "Clara," he whispered. "What was I supposed to do?" He came to me desperate. He said he would lose his business, lose his home, lose his family. I thought I could buy him time, just enough for him to turn things around. I slammed the papers down in front of him. "This isn't buying time, Samuel. This is handing him our lives." He forged my name. He dragged us into his lies. "And you let him. Don't you see we're not his safety net, we're his target?" The argument stretched late into the night. Voices raised, tears shed, neither of us willing to back down. For the first time in decades of marriage, I looked at my husband and felt not just disappointment, but betrayal. He had always been my partner, my anchor, the one person I trusted beyond all others. And now I saw that trust had been eroded quietly, chipped away by secrets he had justified as protecting me. In truth, he had protected Ethan, even at the cost of my peace of mind. The tension between us grew heavier with each passing day. I caught him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking, his eyes full of guilt. At dinner, the silence stretched long, broken only by the clatter of silverware. Yet despite the distance between us, we both knew we couldn't afford to fracture. Ethan and Vanessa were circling closer, their pressure more obvious than ever. If Samuel and I didn't find a way to stand together, they would tear us apart completely. Ethan's visits grew more frequent. He would show up unannounced, always with Vanessa at his side, always armed with new suggestions about how to secure our future. One evening he arrived with glossy brochures for senior living communities, spreading them out on the kitchen table as if he were doing us a favor. "It makes sense, Mom," he said smoothly. "This house is too big for you and Dad. One fall down those stairs, and it's all over. At a place like this, you'd have nurses on call, meals prepared, everything taken care of. And selling the house now would get you top dollar. Think about how much easier life would be." His tone was gentle, but his eyes betrayed him. They weren't full of concern. They were calculating, watching to see if I would crack. I forced a laugh, playing along. "It's a nice idea, Ethan, but I'm not ready to give up my garden just yet. You know how I love those roses." Vanessa leaned in, resting her manicured hand on mine. "Oh, Clara, you'd have roses there too. And think of the relief you wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Let us take care of it." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but her grip was firm, almost possessive. I pulled my hand away gently and excused myself to check on dinner. Behind me, I heard Ethan sigh in frustration, and I knew my resistance was wearing thin on them. That night, alone in the dark, I replayed every word, every look. Their patience was thinning. Their plan was accelerating. And if I didn't act soon, I might lose the chance to protect not only myself, but also Samuel, who seemed increasingly trapped by the weight of his own poor decisions. I began to write everything down in a notebook I hid beneath the mattress: dates, conversations, observations. I copied the forged documents and stashed them in a separate place, just in case. If they thought I was naive, I would let them believe it, but I would no longer be defenseless. I would build my own case, quietly, carefully, until the day came when the truth could no longer be denied. Still, despite my growing resolve, fear gnawed at me, because even as I gathered evidence, I couldn't shake the memory of Ethan's words to Samuel in the garage. It's the only way to save himself, the only way to escape his debts, the only way to secure his future. What if those words didn't just mean financial manipulation? What if his desperation ran deeper, darker? Then I dared to admit I tried to push the thought aside, but it lingered like a shadow I couldn't escape. And soon, that shadow would reveal itself in a way that shattered whatever illusions I still clung to. The revelation came on a night that should have been unremarkable, just another quiet evening in our house. Samuel and I had eaten dinner in silence, the tension between us so thick it was like a third presence at the table. He excused himself early and went to his study, and I sat staring at my half-finished plate of roast chicken, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quiet. I couldn't live in the fog of half-truths anymore. The evidence I had already gathered was too heavy to ignore. If I didn't confront Samuel now, I feared I would drown in questions with no answers. I found him in the study, slumped over his desk, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose. Papers were spread in front of him, but his hands were pressed against his face. He looked older than I had ever seen him, worn down by secrets he no longer seemed able to carry. "Samuel," I said softly, my voice trembling, "I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. What have you been hiding from me?" He didn't look up at first. Instead, he let out a long, weary sigh, the kind that comes from years of suppressed guilt. When he finally raised his head, his eyes glistened. "Clara," he whispered, "there's something about Marcus's death that I never told you." The room tilted. For 20 years, I had lived with the pain of losing my firstborn in a car accident, clinging to the version of events the police gave us that it was late, the roads were wet, and Marcus must have lost control. Never once had I questioned it, because the alternative was unbearable. Now, hearing Samuel's words, I felt a tremor in my chest. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. He closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was broken. That night, Marcus came to me in the garage. He was angry. He had bank statements in his hand. He said Ethan had been stealing from our accounts, withdrawing money behind our backs. He had proof. He said he was going to confront Ethan, and if Ethan didn't admit it, he'd come straight to us. I gripped the back of the chair to steady myself. "You knew. You knew Ethan was stealing even then." Samuel nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I followed Marcus that night. I was worried about what would happen. They met near the old county road, by the bend where the accident happened. I stayed far enough back so they wouldn't see me, but close enough to hear. They were shouting. Marcus was furious, calling Ethan a liar, a thief," Ethan shouted back, saying Marcus was always the favorite, that everything would go to him because he was the oldest. He said he was sick of being in Marcus's shadow. My knees felt weak. I sank into the chair across from him. And then what my voice was barely a whisper. Samuel buried his face in his hands. I followed them that night, but I stayed back, near the trees. They were shouting, Marcus waving papers in Ethan's face. I couldn't hear every word, only fragments: thief, favorite, inheritance. Then came a crash, the sound of metal against metal. I ran forward and saw Marcus on the ground, the car rolling, his body pinned before I could reach him. Ethan stood there trembling, swearing over and over it was an accident. And God help me. Clara? I believed him, or maybe I just wanted to believe. The air left my lungs. All these years, I had pictured Marcus alone in those final moments, a tragic accident of fate. Now I saw it differently. My two sons locked in a fight that ended with one dead and the other standing over him, shaken but alive. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. Samuel's hands trembled. "Because Ethan begged me. He swore it was an accident. He said Marcus had slipped. He was terrified. He said if I told you, you would never forgive him. And Clara, I couldn't lose both my sons in one night. I thought protecting him would save what little we had left." Tears blurred my vision. "You didn't protect him. Samuel, you enabled him. You let him bury the truth, and now it's back to destroy us all." My voice rose with years of pent-up grief. "Do you know what it's like to mourn your child every single day while sleeping next to the man who kept the truth from you? You carried this secret while I cried myself to sleep for decades." He reached across the desk, but I pulled away. "Clara, I thought I was protecting you. I thought the truth would break you." I shook my head, unable to contain the sob that tore from my chest. The truth didn't break me. Samuel, the lies did. For a long time. We sat in silence, the weight of 20 years pressing down on us. Finally, I asked the question I was almost too afraid to speak. "Do you think Ethan meant for Marcus to die?" Samuel hesitated, his lips trembling. "I don't know. I truly don't. But I do know this: he never once came to me afterward with remorse. He just moved on, as if nothing had happened. And now, seeing the lengths he's willing to go, I fear he's capable of far more than we ever wanted to believe." The revelation hollowed me out. Marcus hadn't just been lost to chance. His death was tied to the very brother I had fought so hard to protect, the son I had poured my love into, and Samuel, the man I trusted with my life, had chosen silence over honesty. Everything I thought I knew about my family had been twisted into something darker, more sinister. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing Samuel's words over and over. "Something about Marcus's death I never told you." It was as if the ground beneath me had cracked open, and I was falling into a pit of betrayal and secrets with no bottom. Yet even in that darkness, one thought burned brighter than the rest. If Ethan had been willing to let Marcus die for money, what was to stop him from finishing what he started? Even if it meant his parents had to vanish too, the truth had finally surfaced, but it brought no peace, only fear. And I knew this was just the first layer of a much deeper, much deadlier secret that had been festering in my family for decades. The air in our home changed after Samuel's confession. It wasn't just the silence that lingered between us, or the way I avoided his eyes. It was the sense that I had been living in a theater of lies. Every scene scripted to keep me blind. I carried that knowledge inside me like a blade, sharp and cutting, and with every passing day I felt the weight of it pressing harder. Ethan and Vanessa's visits became unbearable. Their smiles seemed like masks stretched too thin, and every affectionate gesture felt like theater rehearsed 100 times. But what neither of them knew was that my patience was running out. The breaking point came one Saturday evening at their home. Vanessa had insisted on hosting us for dinner, saying she wanted to show off the new renovations Ethan had done to the kitchen. I almost refused, but Samuel persuaded me. "If we don't go, they'll know something is wrong," he said, reluctantly. I agreed, but my instincts screamed otherwise. The house looked perfect when we arrived. Granite countertops gleamed, candles flickered, the smell of rosemary chicken filled the air. Vanessa poured wine into our glasses and raised hers in a toast. "To family," she said, smiling, "and to the future." Her words tasted bitter in my mouth. I set my glass down without drinking. Halfway through the meal, Ethan excused himself to take a phone call. His voice carried faintly from the hallway, but it was enough for me to catch fragments. "Yes, after the weekend. The house will be signed over. No, she doesn't suspect." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. When he returned, His expression was calm, but my stomach twisted. Later that night, while Vanessa busied herself with dessert, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back down the hall, I noticed Ethan's office door was slightly ajar. Something compelled me to push it open. Inside, papers were spread across the desk, and at the very top was a folder labeled with our last name. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. On Ethan's desk, his laptop screen glowed faintly. A window was open, an email half-written, "Once they're gone, we'll be free hiking trip. Slip and fall, no one will question it." My blood froze. Other subject lines filled the inbox: loan default, transfer authorization, plan anniversary. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of the screen. It was reckless, but I knew I couldn't walk away without proof. My breath caught. This wasn't coincidence. They had planned everything around that night. But it wasn't just the documents. Tucked inside was something far more damning, a series of email printouts between Ethan and Vanessa. My hands shook as I read the words. If they're gone, we're free. The debts will be cleared, the assets ours. Another message from Vanessa. We can stage it as an accident, hiking trip, slip and fall. No one will question it. The blood drained from my face. They weren't just planning to take our money, they were planning to take our lives. The anniversary trip to Michigan hadn't been a celebration. It had been an execution. I stuffed the papers back into the folder, barely managing to steady my breath before stepping out into the hall. But as I did, I froze. Vanessa stood at the end of the hallway, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp. "Lose your way?" "Clara," she asked, her tone syrupy sweet but her gaze full of suspicion. I forced a laugh. "Just looking for the bathroom? Your house is so big. I got turned around." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, next time, just ask." She brushed past me, and I caught the faintest scent of her perfume, sharp and cloying. My hands trembled all through dessert, and I could hardly swallow a bite. That night, back at home, I confronted Samuel again. "They're planning to kill us," I whispered, my voice shaking. I laid the folder on the table, the words staring up at us like a death sentence. He turned pale, his hands clutching the papers. "My God," he murmured. I thought it was only about the money." I grabbed his hand, my nails digging into his skin. "Do you understand now? This isn't about money anymore. They need us out of the way and completely." He nodded slowly, his face ashen for the first time. I saw fear in his eyes, raw and unfiltered. "We need to go to the police," he said. But then he hesitated. "Clara, what if they don't believe us? What if they think we're just paranoid old people accusing our own son without proof? They'll walk away, and then we'll be trapped." He was right. We needed more. The forged signatures, the debts, the emails, they were damning. But what we needed was something indisputable, something that could not be spun or denied. And until we had that, we had to play along. The days after that revelation were some of the hardest of my life. I woke up every morning pretending everything was normal, hugging my grandchildren, smiling at Vanessa, listening to Ethan talk about his plans for our future. But inside, my every nerve was on fire. I watched the way they exchanged glances, the way their voices lowered when they thought I wasn't listening. They were growing impatient. Their debts were closing in, and the anniversary had passed, which meant their plan was already behind schedule. One evening, Ethan leaned across the table, his tone deceptively casual. "Mom, Dad, we were thinking, how about a little trip? There's this beautiful trail up north, a place with the best views you've ever seen. It would be nice for the kids, a family hike." What do you think? I felt the blood drain from my face, but I forced myself to smile. "That sounds lovely." I managed. Samuel's hand tightened around mine beneath the table, his grip trembling. In his eyes, I saw the same terror that clutched at my heart. The truth was now undeniable. Marcus's death hadn't been the accident I believed. Samuel's silence had allowed Ethan to grow bold, to believe he was untouchable. And now, with Vanessa at his side, he was preparing to finish what he started. The facade of family had crumbled completely, revealing the cold machinery of greed and resentment underneath. And as I sat there, smiling weakly while my son described the scenic cliffs of northern Michigan, I realized we were already caught in their trap. But what Ethan and Vanessa didn't know was that I had seen behind the curtain. I had read their script. And though fear pressed down on me like a weight, another thought burned just as fiercely. If they believed we were powerless, they were about to discover how wrong they were. That night after Ethan and Vanessa left, Samuel and I sat at the kitchen table in silence. The only sound was the tick of the clock on the wall, each second loud and merciless. My hands were clasped together so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. Samuel's face was pale, lined with fear, but beneath his trembling I could sense something else, a determination that mirrored my own. We were not going to be their victims. Not again. "Clara," he whispered, leaning forward, "we need to be smart. If we go to the police now, we risk them twisting the story. They'll say we're confused, paranoid, or even trying to ruin their reputations. But if we let them believe we're still in the dark, we can gather everything we need." His words steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint spark of control returning. I opened my notebook, the one I had hidden beneath the mattress, and began writing. Dates, conversations, direct quotes, everything I had observed. Samuel added details I hadn't known: late-night phone calls Ethan had made from the garage, checks Samuel had been pressured to sign, moments he had noticed Vanessa watching me a little too closely. The first step was securing the documents we already had. I gathered the forged papers, the bank letters, and the email printouts I had found in Ethan's office, together. We made copies and stored them in separate places, one set hidden inside the lining of my old winter coat, another sealed in an envelope that Samuel slipped into his desk at the church where he volunteered. "If anything happens to us," he said grimly, "someone will find this next." I reached out quietly to my sister Miriam. I told her only part of the story, enough to plant a seed of awareness without alarming her. "If anything strange happens, promise me you'll look through my hope chest," I said. She gave me a puzzled look, but nodded, sensing the urgency in my tone. It gave me comfort to know that someone outside this house might connect the dots if we suddenly disappeared. Samuel, meanwhile, found an old digital recorder in the garage, a relic from his carpentry days when he used to record measurements and instructions. He tested it, replaced the batteries, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "From now on, whenever Ethan or Vanessa come over, I'll have this running," he said. "If they slip, even once, we'll have their words." The most delicate part of our plan was making them believe we were still pliable. We decided to play along, to nod and smile at their suggestions, to pretend to be considering the senior home, to feign interest in the trip north. It was dangerous, but the more secure they felt, the more careless they might become. I practiced my smile in the mirror, the one that said, "I trust you." Even as my heart seethed with anger, it didn't take long for the opportunity to arrive. A few days later, Vanessa stopped by with a binder full of brochures for vacation homes. She sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the glossy pages, her voice cheerful. "Look at this one. Clara 3 bedrooms, right on the water. Perfect for family gatherings." I leaned over, feigning interest, while Samuel's recorder captured every word. When she said, "Of course, once the house is in our name, we can make decisions more easily." I kept my face calm, though inside I wanted to scream. That single phrase, spoken so casually, was another brick in the case we were building. Meanwhile, I began to watch Ethan more closely. His mask was starting to slip. I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. The debts were pressing in on him, and desperation was cracking his calm exterior. One evening, after dinner, he leaned in close and said softly, "Mom." You know I'd never do anything to hurt you or Dad, right? Everything I'm doing is for the family." His eyes locked onto mine, searching, almost pleading. I forced myself to smile and nod. "Of course. Ethan, I know you mean well." But the recorder in Samuel's pocket was running, capturing every word of his carefully chosen lie. Late at night, Samuel and I whispered together in bed, planning each step. We knew we couldn't confront them directly. We couldn't run, either, because fleeing would only prove to them that we suspected the truth. No, the only way was forward, straight into their plan. "We'll go on the trip," Samuel said finally, his voice steady. "We'll let them think they've won, but we'll be ready. We'll record everything, and if we make it back alive, the police will have no choice but to believe us." It was terrifying, agreeing to walk into their trap. But the alternative, waiting helplessly in our home for whatever scheme they concocted next, was worse. At least on the trip, we would know what was coming. At least we could prepare. I began to think like them, to imagine every angle they might try. If they planned to stage an accident, they would need us near a cliff or a treacherous path. If they wanted it to look like natural causes, perhaps they would tamper with food or drink. I wrote down every possibility, every countermeasure. I packed a small bag with essentials, our copies of the documents, a portable phone charger, a whistle, and even a second recorder hidden inside a tin of mints. For the first time, I no longer felt like prey. I felt like a hunter quietly studying her adversaries, waiting for the moment to strike. Ethan and Vanessa believed they were orchestrating the perfect crime. What they didn't realize was that Samuel and I had slipped into their play as undercover actors, rewriting the script from within. And so, when Ethan called the following week to confirm the trip, I answered with a calm voice that surprised even me. "That sounds wonderful. Son," I said, my tone warm, almost eager. "It'll be nice to get away and spend time together." He chuckled, relieved. "I knew you'd come around." "Mom, this will be a trip we'll never forget." As I hung up the phone, I felt a chill race down my spine. He was right, it would be a trip none of us would ever forget, but not for the reasons he imagined, because this time, I wasn't walking into their trap blindly. This time, I was ready to turn their scheme into their downfall. The morning of the trip arrived with skies too blue to match the storm inside my chest. Samuel and I packed light, as Ethan had suggested, bringing only what they expected us to bring: walking shoes, water bottles, jackets for the cool air. What they didn't know was that tucked in my pocket was the small recorder, switched on before we left the driveway, and in Samuel's backpack lay the duplicates of every forged document and email we had collected. We were no longer just parents going along for a hike. We were witnesses walking into a crime scene we planned to survive. Ethan and Vanessa pulled into our driveway in a borrowed SUV, cheerful and bright, their children left behind with a sitter. Vanessa hopped out first, hugging me warmly, her perfume sharp and overwhelming. "You're going to love this trail, Clara," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's easy, safe, and the views are unforgettable." I returned the hug, my smile just as rehearsed, while the recorder in my pocket caught every word. The drive north was long, Ethan humming to the radio, Vanessa chatting about how this was just what the family needed. Samuel and I exchanged glances in the back seat, silent promises passing between us. Every mile brought us closer to the moment we had been planning for. My stomach churned with fear, but beneath it was a steady current of resolve. When we arrived, the trail looked picturesque, with trees glowing in autumn colors and a gentle wind rustling the leaves. To anyone else, it would have been a perfect family outing. To me, it looked like a carefully chosen stage. Ethan carried a large backpack, heavier than necessary for a simple day hike. I noticed the outline of ropes, the metallic clink of carabiners, the kind of equipment that could be presented as safety gear but also used to stage an accident. Samuel caught my eye and gave the faintest nod. He had noticed too. The hike began pleasantly enough, Vanessa snapping pictures, Ethan pointing out wildlife, the kind of performance meant to lull us into trust. But as the trail grew steeper, their cheerfulness became forced, their glances more frequent. They were calculating, waiting. After nearly an hour, Ethan stopped, gesturing toward a rocky incline leading to a lookout. "This way," he said, his voice casual. "The view from up there is something you'll never forget." The words hit me like ice. I remembered the line in his notes, anniversary. Final step, and suddenly everything aligned. This was it. We climbed carefully, loose rocks shifting underfoot. Vanessa walked ahead, glancing back often, her camera ready. Samuel stumbled once, and Ethan reached out too quickly, steadying him with a grip that looked more like a test of balance than genuine help. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. But I kept moving, one hand resting on my pocket where the recorder hummed silently, collecting every moment. At the top, the view was breathtaking. The valley stretched for miles, the river glittering below. Vanessa clapped her hands together. "Perfect," she exclaimed. "Let's take some photos." "Clara, Samuel, stand right here near the edge." Her smile widened, but her eyes were cold. Ethan moved behind us, his steps too deliberate. Samuel squeezed my hand, the silent signal we had agreed upon. I tilted my head toward Ethan, feigning innocence. "Son," I said softly, "why don't you join us in the photo? It's been so long since we had a picture together." He hesitated, his face flickering with irritation. But Vanessa chimed in sweetly. "Yes, darling, let's all be in this one. I'll set the timer." It was the first crack in their plan. Ethan stepped forward reluctantly, the backpack shifting as he did. While Vanessa fiddled with the camera, Samuel leaned close and whispered so low I barely heard. "Now." He reached into his bag, pulling out the second recorder and setting it discreetly on a rock behind us, hidden but close enough to capture everything. The camera clicked, and for a moment we all smiled, the perfect image of a family enjoying a hike. But then Vanessa's voice changed. "One more," she said, her tone sharper. "Step back a little, closer to the edge." Samuel and I obeyed, but just enough to make it look convincing. Ethan positioned himself behind us, his body tense. I felt the air shift, the moment teetering on the edge like the cliff itself, before he could act. Samuel's voice rang out, sharp against the wind. "Just like Marcus, isn't it you let him fall, you watched your brother die?" Ethan stiffened, his jaw tight. "Stop it!" he snapped, his voice cracking. Samuel pressed harder, relentless. "Say it, Ethan! Say what you did to him!" "Say what you're planning for us now," Ethan exploded, his mask shattering. "I didn't push him. He slipped. I had no choice." The words ripped from him, raw and unguarded, and the recorder caught every syllable. Vanessa gasped softly, turning toward him. Ethan, but it was too late. The words had already been spoken, caught forever on both recorders. Samuel stepped back from the edge, pulling me with him. "We're done playing along," he said firmly. "Whatever happens here today, the world will know. You've confessed in your own words." Ethan's face twisted, half panic, half fury. Vanessa clutched his arm, whispering frantically. They looked at each other, realizing the trap had closed around them. For once, they were the ones caught unprepared. We began the descent carefully, Samuel in front of me, both of us moving steadily down the trail. Behind us, I heard Vanessa hissing, "We need to fix this," and Ethan replying, "It's too late." My heart surged with triumph and fear in equal measure. We weren't safe yet, but the tide had shifted by the time we reached the car. My hands were trembling. I slid into the seat, clutching the recorder in my pocket like a lifeline. Samuel sat beside me, his face pale but resolute. Ethan started the engine in silence, the cheerful hum from earlier gone. The drive back was quiet, thick with tension, but I no longer felt powerless. We had walked into their trap and walked out with their confessions. The plan that was meant to silence us had become the very weapon that would destroy them. The ride back from the mountains was suffocating. Ethan drove with his jaw clenched, staring straight ahead, while Vanessa sat stiffly beside him, her hands gripping her phone as if it were a lifeline. Samuel and I sat in the back, silent but steady, each of us aware that the tiny device in my pocket now held their undoing. Every mile closer to home felt like a mile closer to justice. I thought they might lash out, try to snatch the recorder, but fear had taken hold of them. They knew the words were out, and there was no way to pull them back. When we arrived at our house, Vanessa forced a smile, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Thank you for coming. Clara, thank you. Samuel, we'll talk soon about everything." Her words trembled on the edge of collapse. Ethan didn't speak at all. He just gave a curt nod before driving off, the SUV disappearing into the twilight. I exhaled shakily, realizing I had been holding my breath since we left the cliffs. Samuel and I wasted no time. He pulled the recorder from his backpack. I placed mine beside it, and together we listened. Every word was there, clear as a bell. Ethan's muttered confession, Vanessa's casual talk of when the house is in our name, the conversation about Marcus that Samuel had forced into the open. My chest ached as I heard it all again. But alongside the pain was a rising sense of triumph. This was no longer suspicion. This was evidence. The next morning, we went straight to the police. At first, the officer behind the desk looked skeptical, as if he expected two anxious seniors spinning wild tales about ungrateful children. But when Samuel placed the flash drive on the table and explained what it contained, the officer's expression changed. A detective joined us, headphones in, listening intently. The longer he listened, the deeper the crease in his brow became. Finally, he set the recorder down and looked at us gravely. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris," he said, "you've just given us a case." What followed was a blur of statements, signatures, and interviews. The detectives moved quickly, securing warrants to search Ethan's office and financial accounts. Within days, the evidence piled up proof of forged signatures, fraudulent loans, and debts so deep they could never be repaid. The email chains we had copied were matched with records from Ethan's servers. The case was airtight. When the arrests came, it was almost surreal. I watched from the kitchen window as police cars pulled into Ethan and Vanessa's driveway. Officers led them out in handcuffs while neighbors stood gawking. Vanessa wept dramatically, clinging to Ethan until they pulled her away. Ethan kept his head down, his face a mixture of rage and defeat. For years, they had played the role of the perfect couple, the caring son and devoted daughter-in-law. Now their masks were stripped away for everyone to see. The courtroom was packed, reporters scribbling furiously as the recordings played. Ethan's voice echoed. "I didn't push him. He slipped. I had no choice." Gasps rippled through the gallery. When Vanessa's emails flashed on the projector, "Once they're gone, we'll be free." A woman in the back covered her mouth. Horrified, the jury left to deliberate, and 3 long days crawled by. When they returned, the foreman's voice rang clear, guilty on all counts. The room erupted tears, whispers, even applause. I gripped Samuel's hand, and for the first time in decades, I felt the weight of justice settle where it belonged. When the judge read the sentence, life imprisonment without parole, I felt a wave of release wash over me. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was something heavier, deeper. Justice for Marcus, whose voice had been silenced, for Samuel and me, who had carried lies for too long, for the grandchildren, who would one day know the truth about the parents who betrayed them. In the months that followed, Samuel and I began to rebuild. We filed for custody of the children, a long and painful process, but one that eventually ended with us bringing them into our home. At first, they were confused, frightened, asking when Mommy and Daddy were coming back. I held them close and told them only what they needed to hear, that they were safe, that we loved them, and that we would never let them go. Over time, the questions lessened, replaced by laughter in the backyard, drawings taped to the fridge, the sound of small feet racing down the hallway. The house that had felt like a prison of secrets was alive again. Samuel and I, too, found a kind of healing. We planted a garden in Marcus's memory, a place where we could sit and talk to him, where the children could learn about the uncle they would never meet. At first, the guilt between us was heavy. His silence weighed against my anger. But slowly, with each shared story and tear, forgiveness bloomed. We had both been broken by Ethan's choices, but together we had survived. That survival was no small thing. Sometimes at night, I still hear Ethan's words echoing in my mind. I had no choice, but now I see them for what they were. Excuses from a man who had chosen greed over family, lies over love. His downfall wasn't just his debts or his crimes. It was his belief that Samuel and I were powerless. He underestimated us, and that was the mistake that cost him everything. As I tuck the children into bed, their little hands wrapped around mine, I feel something I thought I had lost forever: peace. Our story isn't without scars. It never will be. But the scars are proof that we endured, that we refused to be erased. I tell the children stories of Marcus, of his kindness and laughter, of the dreams he once shared with us, and I tell them this, that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the light. One evening, after the children were asleep, Samuel turned to me and said softly, "Clara, do you think we'll ever be happy again?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "I don't know if happiness comes back the same way," I said. "But maybe it comes back different, stronger, because we earned it." He nodded, squeezing my hand, and for the first time in years, I believed it too. Our story could have ended at the bottom of a cliff. Instead, it ended in a courtroom, in truth spoken aloud, in justice carried out. And as painful as it was, I know now that survival itself is a kind of victory, because the moment we stopped pretending, the moment we chose to fight, we reclaimed more than our lives. We reclaimed our power.
Did you enjoy my story? What a journey it has been. I truly wonder, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have chosen silence to keep the peace, or would you have done what I did to reclaim your dignity? Let's meet in the comments below. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. I'm reading every single one. Which city are you listening from tonight? If my story resonated with you, you can support me and help me bring more stories like this to the world by sending a super thanks. Your sweet support means the world to me and allows me to continue this journey with all of you. On the screen now, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend you watch next. There are so many more on my channel, each with its own lessons and triumphs. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for being here with me. Until the next story, with love and respect.